everyone, welcome. It's Jeannine from Save the Bay, and welcome to our Breakfast by the Bay that we do every Monday through Friday at 10 a.m. Thank you guys so much for joining in. I have Mr. Jeff behind the camera. He'll be reading all your questions or comments that you might have throughout the lesson. So if you have any, write them down and he'll shout them out and hopefully we'll be able to answer them. Right now, as everyone's tuning in, give Mr. Jeff a big thumbs up. You can see everything all right, if you can hear everything all right. That way he knows and he can fix everything before we get started. Also, if I have any students joining in, please shout out your school and let us know what school you're representing. We might give you guys a big shout out at the end. We're excited you guys are all here and we're ready to get started with our lesson of the day. So today, what we're going to be talking all about is habitats around Narragansett Bay. Can anyone out there tell me, what is a habitat? Habitat is a place where an animal lives. It's a place where plants or animals live. It's where they call home. Can anyone think of what an animal or what a plant might need to make sure that the habitat is the perfect habitat for them? I might think that they need food, they need water, they might need oxygen to breathe. They also are going to need a shelter to hide in. And they also need a lot of space where they can move around and find all these different things. So today, we're going to be exploring 4 of our favorite habitats that you can find around Narragansett Bay's coastline. Can any of you guys maybe guess what habitats we might be talking about today? Or can any of you guys think of any habitats that you might have explored in Narragansett Bay on your own? Write those down and follow me over here while we get started with one of our first habitats. Come on over. Awesome, welcome guys. So if you guys are just joining in, it's me, Jeannine, exploring habitats with you guys today. And we have Mr. Jeff behind the camera. So if you have any questions or comments, write them down and he'll shout them out and hopefully I'll be able to answer them for you guys. So today, we are going to be exploring a few different habitats. The first one we're going to explore is our sandy beach. This is probably our most popular habitat that I bet a few of you guys have explored before. Now what's really cool is the sandy beach has 3 different zones that I want to shout out today that are pretty important. The first one, of course, is a low tide zone. The next one is our high tide zone. Does anyone think if they went to the beach, how could they find out where the high tide zone is? Maybe if you were there exactly at high tide, you'd be able to see how high the tide was able to actually go. But what if you're there a little bit after high tide? What could you look for? What I would look for is the rack line. So the rack line is that area where the waves come crashing down on the shore and it leaves a bunch of debris from the sea. So if you look at my poster right here, you guys can see that our rack line right here has a bunch of different things. We have seaweed, we have shells, and maybe we have some living animals that are going to be hanging out along the rack line. Another really important zone that we need to point out is our dune grasses. So maybe you saw these with Adam and Jess. They did a lesson all about dune grasses, telling us how they're important habitat for animals, and now they're important for us in our beaches as well. Dune grasses are able to stop beach erosion, and also if there's a really big storm, they're able to take all that water so the water doesn't go behind the dune grasses and maybe cause flooding to houses or buildings or roads. So they're really important for plants and animals, but they're also really important for us as well. Now, the sandy beach is not always an easy place to live. You have the waves crashing down, you have the tides changing, and sometimes you have really extreme temperatures. In the summer it can get really hot, in the winter it can get really cold. Where do you guys think all these animals live? Where do you think they might hide if there's some extreme weather, extreme temperatures? Well, look at our poster, we can see a lot of them like to hide underneath the sand. There's tons of space underneath that sand for all these animals to move around. We can find a lot of shellfish, sometimes some crabs will hang out there, and some worms. So if we look right here, we can see a lot of different shellfish. We have our state quahog, we have a razor clam, we also have a big surf clam, and we have a soft shell clam. What I like about this poster is not only can you see the shellfish, but does anyone know what this is sticking out of our shellfish? That's their big muscular foot. Do you guys remember what they use that for? They'll use that to move, and they can actually use it to dig down deep into the sand to maybe hide from predators, or maybe hide from you if you're trying to catch them, if you're quahogging. Their muscular foot is so strong, they can go about a foot deep, maybe even a little bit deeper, which is pretty cool. Now, does anyone remember what these things are sticking out of them? It's not their muscles, it's their siphons. What do they use those siphons for? They'll stick them out of the mud, they'll put them in the water, and what are they pulling out of the water? They're getting oxygen to breathe, and they're getting a lot of that plankton to eat as well, a lot of food. So those siphons are really important. It's really cool that you can see them sticking out of the water. Now we see a lot of different sea creatures, or seashells, hanging out at our sandy beach, but I also want to point out a lot of birds. Whenever I go to the sandy beach, I always notice all the birds. This one right here is really cool that relies on the sandy beach. This is a a sandpiper. The sandpipers are migratory birds. So when they're taking that big journey from the Arctic all the way to South America. They'll hang out at the sandy beach, probably hang out on the rack line, eat as much food as they can, rest up for that really long journey. Now, one that you might have seen, but also might not have, is our piping plover. This bird right here is really great at camouflaging with the sand, and he's one of the ones that rely on the dunes for making his nest. So sometimes if you're at the beach and maybe you see an area above the high tide zone that's blocked off, maybe it's one of the piping plover's nests. They do such a good job not just camouflaging themselves, but camouflaging their nests and eggs. Sometimes we need to protect them so no one steps on them while they're enjoying the sandy beach. Now, I know you guys know this one. We have one of our seagulls right here. Now, our seagulls, of course, are scavengers. They'll hang out everywhere on the sandy beach. They'll try and get into your lunches, and they'll hang out along the rack line looking for a snack. Now, if they found a big quahog along the rack line, how would they open it? Does anyone know what they can do to open up that hard shell? A lot of times what I'll see them do is they'll pick it up, they'll go to the hard surfaces, or they'll go to the parking lots, they'll drop that shell, let the hard surface do all the hard work for them, crack open that shell for them, and then they can eat the clam inside. But they're not just scavengers. What's really cool about these guys, or kind of rude, is they are what we call pirates. So they'll see another bird with a snack that they want and try and steal it, or they'll try and commandeer it from them. The last bird I want to shout out is going to be our cormorants. So these are the all black birds that maybe you've seen. What's really cool about them is they'll dive into the water and they can actually swim and see underwater to try and catch all their food. Now, if you haven't seen them, look at this poster. I'm going to go turn the lights on. All right, I'm back. Welcome. Thank you guys for tuning in. I'm Jeannine, and we're going to be exploring habitats. We were just exploring the sandy beach, and I was pointing out our cormorant that dives into the water. And maybe you haven't seen him dive into the water, but I bet you guys have seen him with his wings open, trying to dry out his feathers for his next snack. So these are some of the things that you can find at the sandy beach. But let's look at what I was able to find today. Come check out some of my shells. All right, awesome. So, of course, I found our state quahog. I found this giant surf clam, especially if you're along Easton's Beach, you guys can find a bunch of these. We found some whelk shells, found some moon snails. These are also all along Easton's Beach. And what I want to point out with this one is this one right here has this big hole in it. Now, our moon snails and our whelks are predators. And when they want to find a snack, what they'll do is they'll get a shell, they'll drill a hole in it, and then they can suck out the clam like a little clam smoothie, and that will be their lunch for the day. So you can actually see that perfect hole that ate this moon snail right here, which is really cool. Now we also have Captain Chris's favorite, jingle shells or mermaid's toenails or fisherman toenails, whatever you want to call them. We also have a lot of oyster shells right here. And I think everyone's favorite, you can also find a bunch of these at Easton's Beach, is our mermaid purses. So these guys were laid by a little skate or maybe a shark that was living in our bay. They hatch them just like chicken eggs. So they'll lay an egg, their babies will stay inside the eggs for about 9 months, and when they're ready, what they will do is they'll poke a hole out of their mermaid's purse, they'll swim out, and then the mermaid's purse will wash ashore and be there for us to find along maybe the rack line or the beaches, which are really always exciting to find. All right, you guys ready to move on to our next habitat? And again, if you guys are just joining in, it's Miss Jeannine and Mr. Jeff behind the camera answering all your questions. So thank you guys for tuning in, and we're excited to explore our rocky shore. All right, on to our next one. The rocky shore, just like the sandy beach, has a few different zones. So the first zone I want to point out is our high intertidal zone. So the rocky shore is made up of all the plants and animals that live at the rocky shore during high tide and low tide. So the high intertidal zone is the area where the animals live only at high tide. So this area does not get a lot of water. It only gets water at high tide. So the animals you're going to find here are going to be snails, barnacles. We can see a lot of our rockweed over here. The next tide is going to be our mid-intertidal zone. This gets water about half the time. So you're going to find a few more creatures here. You're going to find a lot of blue mussels here. Maybe some oysters are going to live here. Tons of snails. And we have some more crabs. And then also along this line, you're going to find a lot of red seaweed or a lot of Irish moss likes to hang out in the mid-intertidal zone. And the last one, our low intertidal zone. These are going to be animals that do not like spending a lot of time out of water. So you can find some sea stars, some sea urchins, and our big pieces of seaweed like our kelp are going to be hanging out here. Just like our sandy beach, it's not easy to live at the rocky shore. All the animals that live here have to be really hardy because you have the waves crashing down on them, trying to push them off the rocks. And then every 6 hours, the tide is changing, leaving them full of water or leaving them with no water at all. So all of our animals need special adaptations to help them survive. Now, if the water is leaving, can anyone think of any adaptations that some of these animals might have to hold on to some of the water while they're waiting for it to come back? What do you guys think that the snails and maybe the mussels and the oysters can do? They can close their shells and they can hold some of the water inside of there. And they can hold that water to keep their body nice and moist, keep their gills nice and wet until the tide comes back up. What do you guys think the crabs might do when the tide goes out? Well, the crabs, they're a little bit faster and they can actually move. So they might follow the tide down, they might go with the water. But if you are at the rocky shore and you are looking for crabs, where might you look? I know when I'm at the rocky shore, where I like to look is I will pick up some rocks, I'll look underneath the rocks and maybe even underneath the seaweed. So look at places that stay a little bit wetter until the water comes back up. These are some great places that they'll hide and that you can look for them. Now, they also have to deal with the tides crashing down on them. Can anyone think of any adaptations our animals have to make sure that they can stay on the rocky shore while those tides are coming up? Can anyone think of any adaptations that might, or any animals that might stick to the rocks? So I know that our snails use their big muscular foot, or a lot of our periwinkles, which are one of our most common snails in the bay. These guys will use their big muscular foot to stick onto the rocks. What about our sea stars? Our sea stars have a ton of suction cups that they use to stick onto the rocks and hold on tight. And does anyone remember what the cousin of the sea star is? The sea urchins. They also have suction cups, but they also have all those spines. So they can actually use those spines to kind of like dig a hole into the rocks so they have extra protection. What about our seashells? How do our mussels and maybe our oysters stick, and even our barnacles, how do they stick on those rocks? Well, these guys don't like to move too often. So we know our mussel shells, they have those bisel threads that are kind of like Spider-Man threads. They'll throw them out there, stick onto the rocks. Whereas our barnacles and our oysters, wherever they land, they will grow there and they'll stay there their entire lives. So let's check out some of the things that I found over here. So luckily, during my exploration and going through my own rocky shore, I was able to find some sea stars. I was able to find, these are one of my favorites. This is a slipper shell because it looks like you can slip your finger right in here. But our slipper shells, our slipper shells and our periwinkles, they just have that one strong muscular foot that sticks to our rocks. Whereas our mussels and our oysters will stay on those rocks forever. So we know our mussels have those bisel threads, but we can see what's really cool is our oysters, sometimes they like to stick to hard surfaces. So sometimes they'll stick directly to the rocks, or sometimes they'll stick to old shells. So we can see two of these oysters have decided to live on another old oyster shell. So even these oysters will become new habitat for new animals, which is really cool. So these are some great adaptations that they have to make sure that they're not gonna slide off the rocks when the waves come crashing down on them. Awesome, you guys ready to explore our next habitat? Come on over. So the next habitat we're gonna explore is our salt marsh. This one right here is the most hardworking habitat for plants and animals and for us. So what makes the salt marsh super unique is it's mostly made up of grasses. And if we look at our poster, we have tons of different plants in this photo. We have our common reed right here that likes to grow really big next to the water. We have our hay meadow, which likes to grow in big tufts and it likes to grow kind of like a field. We have some more common reed. That's a little bit shorter when it's not next to the water. We have spike grass and we have pickleweed. What's really cool about these grasses is they also need adaptations. These plants are living right next to the water, right next to this brackish water. It has salt in it. Not all plants love salt water. So these guys need to have adaptations to make sure they can suck up the water and push out the salt. So a lot of times you go to a salt marsh and you put your finger along a blade of grass, you can actually feel the salt that they pushed out of their body, which is really cool. Now, because our salt marsh has tons of grasses, these grasses every summer will grow really big and strong, and in the winter when they die, they'll break down. And what you'll notice is our salt marsh is full of mud. So as these grasses break down, they're what's making all this marshy mud that we call peat. And because we have all this peat right here, and because all these grasses are breaking down and decomposing, they're starting the base of the food chain. So our salt marshes have tons of food. We call them a food factory, which makes it a really great place for a lot of animals to live. And because a lot of animals want to live here, because there's a lot of food, a lot of places to hide, it's a great place that we call a nursery. A lot of baby animals want to be born here. I know you guys know this guy right here, our horseshoe crab. They love hanging out here while they're babies. They have a lot of food, a lot of places to hide until they grow big and strong and go out into the bay. It's not just these animals that like to visit. A lot of birds, while they're migrating, will stop at a salt marsh. Great place to rest and a great place to get a lot of food before they go out on that big journey. And I told you salt marshes are hardworking, not just for plants and animals, but for us as well. All this mud has a bunch of holes in it. And what happens during a big rainstorm, when all the water falls on the land and it comes rushing down to the bay, one of the first places it'll go is our salt marshes. And all this mud, all this peat, acts like a giant sponge. It soaks up all that water, helping us prevent any flooding. Maybe if you've ever had a big rainstorm, maybe your basement flooded. Salt marshes will take up that water to reduce flooding in buildings and roads in our streets. So that's one way they work really hard for us. But they're not just absorbing that water. When they suck it all in, they're also cleaning it for us. So as all that water goes through the mud, that mud will take out any pollution and any toxins. So when it's done going all the way through the mud, it'll slowly go out into our bay nice and clean. It's not just the mud doing this work. These plants will also trap a lot of the bigger pieces of trash. So if you guys think about on the side of the road, like straws and bags and food wrappers and water bottles, these types of pollution might get stuck in the grasses before they go out into the bay. So the salt marsh is a great habitat that works hard for the plants and animals, but for us as well. So we know birds like to live here. We can see that some fish will swim by. We know our horseshoe crabs like to be born here. You'll see, of course, more mussels and then some snails. This snail right here, this little one, is one of my favorites. This is called a coffee bean snail, and this guy has lungs. So if he has lungs, do you think he loves being in the water at high tide? He doesn't. He needs air to breathe. So what they'll do at high tide, they'll actually climb all the way up on top of the grasses until the high tide goes away, and they'll come back down. So you guys are ever in a salt marsh, a great place to look for these guys at low tide is going to be like in the mud next to the grasses. Next to their roots is where they hang out because they need a really quick escape to go up those grasses. Now another really cool crab, or another cool animal, is my fiddler crab. So this one right here, he's really easy to notice because he has this giant claw. So this fiddler crab, he's called a fiddler crab because his giant claw looks like he's playing the fiddle. And he doesn't just use this claw to look good, he uses it to defend against predators and to even dig holes in the mud for his own special habitat. And he can wave it around to attract a mate as well. So these are some animals you can find in salt marsh, but let's check out what I was able to find in our own personal salt marsh. So I wasn't able to find a full horseshoe crab, but I was able to find one of its molts. So I can tell that this one was probably really big. So if anyone remembers, if it was really big, do you think it was a boy? Do you think it was a girl? This one's really large. So I'm thinking it might have been a girl. I also have one of its legs that it left behind for me to explore. We have tons of blue mussels. And do we know if these are blue mussels or red mussels? If we look really closely, is it really smooth and a bright blue, or it has some ridges on it? So we actually have some ridge mussels in there. Now, how did these guys stay stuck to the mud? Does anyone remember? They're using those biseal threads. Now, we have some more snails that like to hang out in the mud and explore the salt marsh as well. All right, you guys ready for our last habitat? All right, come on over. This one is really unique. You guys might not have even heard of this one before. So now, I'll do a little turn. So now we are going to the eelgrass beds. So eelgrass beds are really important because they're kind of unique. Eelgrasses are one of the only true flowering plants that live underneath the water. So they're a little bit different than our seaweed. These guys actually have roots that will bury themselves in the sand, hold on to that sand and stop erosion for us. They have seeds and they even flower. So they are a true flowering plant that lives in our water. Eelgrass beds like to live in giant groups. So like to live in big fields underwater, and they can grow really big. They can grow up to 3 feet tall. Now, eelgrass beds are really important because, like our other habitats, they're a place to live, they're a place to hide. A lot of animals can hide in between the eelgrass beds. So it's a great place to hide, tons of food here. It's also a nursery. Little baby animals also like being born here because they have all that food and all that places to hide to protect themselves. So here you could find fish, flounder, maybe some crabs, and you can find a lot of shellfish. One of the most popular animals you guys can find here is our scallops. Scallops love to call these guys home. They actually spend the first half of their life living in the eelgrass beds. So if you guys look at this photo right here, you guys can see these baby scallops like to attach themselves to the eelgrass beds. And this is really important because when they're really little, they're able to collect all that water and filter feed like most shellfish, but they're off of the bottom, protecting themselves from other predators like maybe sea stars or whelks. So it's a great place for them to spend most of their time. until they get big and heavy and they will sink to the bottom.
We have our first question of the day.
Oh, this is exciting.
Captain Megan wants to know what can harm the eelgrass beds.
This is a really good question. So, what I was just going to tell people is that scallops used to be so popular in our bay because we had so many eelgrass beds that scallops were actually commercially scalloped in our bay, which is really cool. But Mr. Adam was telling us a little bit yesterday that our eelgrass beds are being harmed, and a big part of it is climate change. As sea level rises, the eelgrass is not able to compete with it. Also, our eelgrasses are a really good indicator species or indicator habitat. So eelgrass beds need really healthy, clean, clear water with plenty of sunlight. So as we increase the amount of pollution in our bay, we're going to reduce the amount of eelgrass. So if we're going to a habitat and we see tons of eelgrass hanging out in the habitat, that's going to tell us that the water is really clean, clear, and healthy and has good water quality. But as we increase pollution, we're going to start to reduce the amount of eelgrass beds we're having in our bay. Another thing that we can help is if you're boating or if you're swimming around eelgrass beds, you want to be really careful. You want to make sure that your boat propeller doesn't rip up any eelgrass beds. You want to make sure you're not walking on it because that can hurt it as well. Thank you, Captain Megan. That was a really good one. Awesome. Now, let's look at what animals might call our eelgrass beds home. If you guys were watching Breakfast with the Bay yesterday, we talked a little bit about some of the animals that like to live here. And we're able to see some of our seahorses. So seahorses love to live in our eelgrass beds. And you can see one of our seahorses here. And what they like to live in the eelgrass beds is because we know these guys are not great swimmers. So what they'll do is they'll take their tail and it'll help them stick to the eelgrass beds and protect them so they're able to find some food and they're able to stay there and not get washed away. Other things that you guys might find in eelgrass beds are some blue crabs, maybe our whelks, and of course, if I go through my habitat, I am going to find tons and tons of scallops because this is one of their favorite habitats to live in. We can even see some of our baby scallops that might have started in our eelgrass beds as little babies. Well, awesome. I had so much fun exploring all these habitats. We went through so many different habitats with each other. If you guys are tuning in now, what I want you guys to do is click the link and you guys can actually go through and we have a worksheet and you guys can write down different animals and different special features each habitat has. So if you guys enjoyed this video, you want to keep working, use that worksheet and see if you can remember any special features about each of our habitats. Also, if you guys want to join us later on, we're going to have a whole habitat craft that you guys can do at home with your family. Does anyone have any questions out there?
Can we shout out Dighton School for tuning in today?
Woo! Awesome. Thank you guys so much for telling us what school you guys are joining in from and representing. We're excited to know where you guys are learning from. I had so much fun with you guys, and if you guys are enjoying Breakfast by the Bay, feel free to click the link and donate and help us with some of the work that Save the Bay is doing. And until next time, I'll see you guys at Save the Bay with Breakfast by the Bay. Bye.